We had the age of the planet Earth and Adam before the flood. That is, it had existed 1,650 years, at which time God destroyed it. This is being written in the year 2010 AD, so take 1,656 years from it. That goes back to 354 AD, 14 years after Constantine died. Need we list even briefly the events from that date to the present? The Crusades, the Holy Roman Empire, the Reformation, the Renaissance, the French Revolution, discoveries of Columbus, the two world wars, the atomic bomb, nuclear fission. How ridiculous to think those people were spending their time twiddling their thumbs for upward of 2,000 years. I've had professors with strings of degrees who taught those people were so illiterate they could not read or write. Makes me wonder where to place the word illiterate. Turn back to the latter statement of verse 26 of chapter 4. Then began men to call upon the name of Jehovah. The word then, the first of the sentence, tells something of the time. Moses ended the discussion of that remarkable and talented family of Lamech of Cain, 7 of them in all, husband, 2 wives, 3 sons, and a daughter. This is the 7th generation from Cain, whereas the Seth line covers 10 on until Noah. The term then marks a break in the continuity of the narrative. It is an adverb and means next in line or soon afterwards. Soon after the burst of inventive power of that family and the resulting effects of their genius, the collective thinking shifted off to Jehovah heavenly and focused on man and things earthly. To such an extent, those who were not caught up in the times of enormous productivity and worldly activity appeared a new, separate, and distinct class of people. They were God-callers, or followers, viewed by the majority as odd, out of touch, not interested in trying to improve their world. A bunch of mossbacks, old fogies, religious fanatics, so narrow-minded they literally taught there was only one God, the Jehovah. But look at the second word of the sentence, began. Then began to call upon the name of the Lord. Since these essays are not designed as a critical commentary, it is not appropriate or proper to examine every false idea someone has or might advance. Here, however, is no ordinary statement. Moses injects it for effect. He has taken us into a new world of thought. It is a transition. We cannot afford to miss it. There are a number of possibilities. The old Jewish rabbis, some said here was the origin of idolatry. Maimonides, the great Spanish rabbi, philosopher, and physician, who lived in the 12th century, 1135 to 1204, advanced this notion. Other scholars say that no human creature, man, had ever talked to God before this time. They had only listened. He talked. Still others contend the emphasis should be placed on the definite article the, placed before the Lord or Jehovah. The Jehovah. If this be the import, then it appears idolatry, worship of other gods, was practiced, and the sons of God refused it, and focused and directed their worship toward the only and true God, Jehovah. It's easy to make a statement without looking or listening to what is said. Notice the one about this being the first time anyone talked to God. Man, they say, listened. God did the talking. Adam and Eve spoke to him before he expelled them from the garden. After eating the forbidden fruit and attempting to hide, they told him they were naked and ashamed. Cain also asked Jehovah, when queried about the whereabouts of his murdered brother, Abel, am I my brother's keeper? And still, scholars say this is the first time that anybody had ever spoke to God. So true conscientious students of the Bible give a little thought before offering a thought on this wonderful book. What then does the passage mean? There are only 3 places to look in such a case. 1, at the passage itself. 2, what's said before. Or 3, what follows. Or it might prove productive to do all 3. After the introduction to the family of Lamech and a short tour of their domestic life, Moses reverts back to the death of Abel at the hands of Cain. Eve gives birth to Seth. Watch carefully the story develop. When Cain was born, Eve said, I had gotten a man with the help of Jehovah. Verse 1, chapter 4. She no doubt has in her mind the statement God made to her and the curse placed on her concerning her seed bruising the serpent's head. Cain, she thought, would be that seed, or at least possibly Abel. Abel was killed and Cain banished. Those events shattered her hope. When Seth came along, it was renewed, the hope was. He proved upright and God-fearing. From the first of chapter 4, drop down to the last of chapter 4, where the thought resumes. Seth's son is Enosh. Here then is the then of the disputed statement. Then began men to call on the name of Jehovah. Call? What means the word? They began at this period to realize and recognize the providential hand of Jehovah in preparing and preserving a line through which that promised seed would eventually come. Here now is the golden thread running through the Bible. That one thought and recognition explains the centrality and the continual presence of Jehovah throughout the flow of world history. Miss it, and history is purposeless. Has no authority to speak, accept it. History makes sense. A few people hereafter designated sons of God are now ready to accept Jehovah as the mover of all historical events. Life has meaning. Out yonder is a goal, one to strive for, and live in hope and expectation of one day attaining. All peoples who understand and believe look forward to the day that seed would come. He did come in the form of the Jesus we know. The mistake moderns make is a failure to understand the actual coming of Christ when born in the major Bethlehem was only the start of the work entailed in bruising the serpent's head. We understood and look forward to his seed, his second coming when that work will be finally completed. The devil himself, that serpent, overcome finally in the destruction of death. The promise in chapter 3, verse 15, will be realized ultimately and fully then. At this stage of man's development, 4 items stand out, though dimly yet he approaches from a distance in appreciation of himself and his surroundings. The quaternion structure consisting of 2 pairs, God and man, world and society. 2 of the 4 elements are beyond his control. 1 he is a sharer with, the 4th at his disposal. God he cannot control. The world was made and he placed on it. The form of his makeup he had little or no input, but outside of self, under God, and within the world, the kind of society in which he would live, produce, and die, he was the architect. A society created within his own mind, existing outside of himself, yet once brought to life would consume his allotted time. We call this process existence, and brought it up originally when discussing the Garden of Eden. Society demands participation, an inescapable reality. Existence is participation. The 2 are mutually dependent on the other. Destroy one, the other ceases. To exist is to participate, but the role of existence is lived in uncertainty, on the edge of both freedom and decision, both a state of uncertainty. Note chapter 6, verse 9. Noah walked with God. The dilemma he solved. The rest of the world did not. God destroyed it. He placed Noah, as he did Adam in the beginning, to establish a new world order. The old world terminated in disorder. Noah was commissioned to restore God's order. How the world of the 6 days of creation, so wonderfully planned, so skillfully executed, finally ended in 40 days of absolute disorder and total destruction. Man, the crown jewel of all the eternal one made, the marvel of all celestial beings existing in that perfect abode and above beyond the heaven of this cosmos, could have degenerated in such conditions the Holy One himself declared it, repented him, he ever made man? Sad, sad the thought. The story of Moses is not yet there. We're only up to the 7th from Cain, all a way still to travel. Evil grows. The good plants are being choked out. They struggle for nutrients from the soil below, for rain from above. The ground grows hard, the soil brittle, the skies brass, the clouds empty. The sun's hot, scorching the tender shoots all around. The fields look green, plush, inviting, especially the daughters of the sons of Cain. Fair as Zillah, beautiful like Naaman. Why sit here and burn up? Destroyed by insects, bugs, and crumbled underfoot by wild animals. The world over yonder seems good to those people. The sons of God saw what? Saw the beauty of those daughters of man. They were vivacious and sagacious, and no doubt with all that shining brass dangling from their ears, circling each exquisite little finger, and tinkling sounds of tiny bells on their shoes, curvaceous and nothing short of sedulous. The earth was filled with flocks and swarms of seductresses. Down every road, among the trees, carrying man-made gods to the specially prepared groves and gardens. And so, says Moses, the sons of God married the daughters of man. The die was cast. The ripple on the pond did the rest. The fourfold structure just mentioned, God, man, world, society, must be viewed as a whole, and ignorance of the whole precludes essential knowledge of the parts. And variegated as they may appear, the diversity blends into the order of durability in contrast to mere transiency. A durable society will last through, though composed of transient members, and so society, one passes while another lasts on. Such is true in the partnership existing between societies and the world. They pass, the world endures. Finding the world under God, it too is transient while God remains. He therefore is truly the eternal one, the final and ultimate lineament of the hierarchy of existence. It was lack of order that brought on the world's destruction. Only God can bring order from chaos. This is the message of chapter 1. The solidarity of that first community in the Garden of Eden was shattered before Eve took the forbidden fruit. It consisted of thought. She thought, he thought, they together thought. The structure was threefold, not quaternary. They could build their own society around others than the ultimate lineament, to fashion to a straight line. Their attempt was circumvention, and circumvention is always the opposite of straight. They thought to leave God out of the equation and fashioned a three-legged table. Unstable it was. Hear Moses more. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all they chose. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Jehovah, who sees the end from the beginning, said immediately, My spirit will not strive with man forever. For he that he also is flesh, yet shall his days be 120 years. Verse 3. This is not, as some wrongly conclude, angel marriages. Angels are of a different order of created being, and between each order a procreative gulf exists over which the orders do not pass. Man, God, placed between the two other orders, angels and lower animals. He cannot mix and produce by either. The law was and still is that seed bears after its kind. Angels did not through the daughters of men produce anything, much less giants. If the Nephilim were giants, they existed before the above-mentioned marriages. Look at the passage. The Nephilims were in the earth in those days and also after that. Notice the phrase, in those days, also after that. To what do these three words, in those days, refer? Again, after what? These last two look back to those days. After those days. After those days, the Nephilims were in the earth. Do we jump verse 3 completely, or leave it out and make verse 4 follow after the period of verse 2? Or does the thought end with verse 2 and a new thought start with verse 3? Moses is the speaker in verse 1 and 2. He ends. And then quotes the words of Jehovah. Jehovah said. What did Jehovah say? Only that contained in verse 3. Then Moses resumed and states what is contained in verse 4. So the Nephilims were in the land at the time the marriages took place between the two different lines of sons, and were not the product of those marriages. Those people, the Nephilims, existed both before and after the marriages. Now drop down a few lines of verse 4, and they bear children to them. Only the females bear children, not males. To whom did those daughters bear children? To the sons of God, or to the Nephilims. If the latter, then the sons of God were Nephilims. We're not finished with the verse. Read it this way. The Nephilims were in the earth in those days, and also after, and the same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. Or, read it another way. And they, daughters of men, bare children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. Again, who did these mighty men of old and men of renown belong to? The grammatical structure favors the second of the two readings. The translator so understood and placed a colon after them and identified it with the sons of God, not to the Nephilims. Here then is the proper paraphrase. The Nephilims, a lawless bunch of people, had developed and roamed over the earth. God had his eyes on them, hoping they would not proliferate further. Yet in the midst of them, his people, so weak now in their faith toward him, started engaging in marriages with the sons of Cain, sons of God, of which these Nephilims were a part, compounding the evil rebellion against true order. He then at that moment of those first marriages, mixed marriages, decreed 120 more years as their period of respite, at the end of which, if no reformation was forthcoming, he would destroy the world by the flood. Noah at this decree was 480 years old. His father Lamech and grandfather Methuselah were 340 years old. And Jehovah God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of thought of his heart was only evil continually. The subject matter has changed. New actors appear on the stage. God now is pushed off and has taken his place as viewer. And Jehovah saw. He had been center stage. Now great men of statute and well known, looked up to, pushed him aside. These men were successful and respected by others of that age. Their words and wishes became law. The masses fell behind, got in line, and followed. But God on the periphery was watching closely every action and probing behind the actual act, searching for the seat. He found it in the collective imagination of the thoughts of their heart. Though too seldom recognized by the moral philosopher, here lies the essential of any correct theory of the mind. Thought is the attitude of the mind, and their attitude continually every day was evil. Why so? Because the proper respect for God no longer resigned and reigned in their hearts. They imagined themselves gods, gods with ability to create, and create they did, other gods of their liking. Gods they controlled, who could not control them, idols. What was that age seeking? One only seeks what he has lost. They had lost order, true order. Having lost that, they groped in the darkness of unstable imaginations, floating aimlessly, no anchor to restrain them. Day and night their thoughts wandered within their heads, over the landscape, up into the heavens, back and forth here and there. They imagined they saw order everywhere. Only God could bring order. This they knew. But the weather was somewhat orderly, at least. The seasons, the rain, the snowfall, even storms proved productive. They made gods, storm gods, rain gods, gods for all seasons. Once they focused inward, they imagined patterns within their own makeup. Those mighty men did. Those men of renown, the leaders of the mass of followers, began to analyze their personal qualities. Hunger, fatigue, love, hate, aggression, successful. They appear to always fall into pairs, pairs opposite in nature. These internal qualities were similar to those of nature. They saw a striking similarity. If the two sets of qualities could be made to fuse and blend together, then perhaps the lost order would resurface. The longer Jehovah watched, the more ridiculous the matter got. So he said, I will permit their hunt, their experiment for 120 years. It was their way of life, not their individual ages, at 120 years. Now get that if you will. Not their ages. 120 years, God says, I'm going to let them experiment with this foolishness that they're carrying on. These men of the earth, so the word implies, were called mighty, and men of renown, or giants. Intellectually they were earthborn. That was all they lived for, all they thought about, things of the earth. They possessed great knowledge, courage, ambition, all couched in wickedness. There is nothing wrong in either, or all of the three attributes. The guard wickedness in which they are clothed that makes them wrong. When God is left out of any transaction, the void will fill with wickedness. Two classes are here presented, those who look only to earth and others who look also to things above. Here evidently is where the terms saints and sinners originate, terms coined to distinguish the two people. Not only does Moses employ the term great to the men, but also connected it to what they were. They were great men, but their wickedness was great. When people possessed of great power are wicked and evil, what is there left to restrain it or them? Here lies the danger of investing one or a few with unlimited power, power to do as they please, accountable to no one. The age before the flood had gotten to that stage, power consolidated in the hands of a few people at the top, accountable to no one below them, and even the God above they denied even existed. They were the very epitome of exclusivity, insulated against any restraining power whatsoever, a horrible state indeed. Where came this condition of man? It arises from a misuse of what makes man so wonderful and special. The very characteristic that places him worlds above the other creatures of which he was placed, free will. The one faculty among many others that connects him to the Creator. He is free, he has a choice. Not only did Jehovah endow man with the ability to choose, but he also set before him what to choose. One of two choices, life or death, righteousness or evil, obedience or disobedience, order or disorder. The choices are simple, well marked. The will is healthy, ready and anxious for daily exercise, responsive to its proper use. Internally, man is wonderfully made, nothing lacking, no superfluous parts. On each kidney, God placed a small yet vital little gland, the adrenaline gland, which produces, in addition to other chemicals, a number of steroid hormones. Basically, the chemicals permit man, if the need arises, to fight or flee. We usually say fight or flight. But the beauty is they don't pop off or explode at will. They are controllable, manageable, if you will. Note my term, if you will. They are controlled by one's will. Will has power, lots of it, more than most people ever use. We introduced this subject way back when we discussed Cain. His lack of control, self-control, caused him to murder his brother Abel. His insides were out of control and showed in his ugly, distorted condition of his face and voice. It corrupted his blood. Blood he passed on to his offsprings. Willpower develops. It does not come fully developed at birth. To do justice to the discussion of it, we must go back beyond birth. As every body, mental or physically, it comes from a pre-existing matrix, an interesting term within itself. Matrix is Latin meaning origin, public registered womb, breeding animals, from matra, mother, the womb or the uterus, that within which or within and from which something originates, takes form, or develops. The will God placed in Adam and Eve was part of that image. Moses says he was made. In printing, the word matrix is a metal mold for casting type, plaster, or similar impressions of type from which a plate can be made, as in stereotype. Where then does will originate? The mother. All life is in the blood. So says Moses. The eating of blood has always been forbidden, still is. Why? The life is in it. Drain out the blood, no life. Contaminate the blood, contaminate the life. Any argument about that? Absolutely none. So recognizes the whole of the medical society. Foreign, deleterious elements taken in the bloodstream of pregnant women flow directly into the blood of that fetus she carries. We all know this. Tobacco, drugs, alcohol, the matter too common, too well documented to further explain. The subject this morning is will. It is. It exists. Every human being has it. God made it part of us. Without it, or in the absence of it, a human being ceases to be human. Anger is also real. It too exists. It may be inflamed. It shows itself in action, oftentimes in a desire to strike back, to fight that which agitates. Nothing again I say wrong with anger, controlled anger that is. But like that wonderful stuff we know as water, once we permit it to rage out of control, is dangerously deadly. But that chemical known as adrenaline is useful if the flow is regulated. But mothers out of control, given to burst of anger during the period of gestation, passes their adrenaline into the blood flowing into that fetus. Why, if this is not true, did the wise Solomon say a cheerful heart is good medicine? What is the absent? A heart filled with anger, sadness, resentfulness, guilt, remorse, hopelessness is bad medicine. Sure, sin proliferates. In quick succession, it reproduces itself. What can it do in 120 years if not checked and eliminated? What do people do who deny this? In the first place, no one in his right mind will deny it. Attempt to get around it? Maybe. How? By denying the flood. It never happened, they say. Jehovah God would never destroy an entire world by a flood. A loving God could not do that, and on they rave. We do. The underlying philosophy of all war is this very action. We can't believe God would subscribe. Our leaders, all government leaders around the world, subscribe to it. During the Civil War here in this country, Sherman did. He was willing to sacrifice his trip from Atlanta to Savannah. He torched for the good of a greater whole. Harry Truman did when he gave permission to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, was subscribing to this philosophy. Why condemn God, who searches the heart, who has the ability to look into the very marrow, the bones, for destroying a race of people infected with an incurable disease before they contaminated millions and billions of others yet unborn? The pre-flood world was destroyed. Its demise was by water, the deluge, under the direction of Jehovah. All life on the earth and the skies, birds of the air, animals on the land, and all of mankind, excepting only the family of Noah, 8 total, and the few animals taken into the ark, was destroyed. This is Bible, and therefore undisputable. The question is, what prompted God to do as he did? Of course, the answer is sin. But only rational beings sin. Why then were the animals and the earth punished for the sin of man? I have never been absolutely satisfied with sermons I've heard, nor the many books I've read trying to explain this somewhat paradoxical event. And the problem centers around the word sin. What is sin? Is it real or an abstraction devoid of substance? Does it exist as a separate entity? Is sin only something God conceives of as an affront to his authority? Or is there essence within it? Is there tangibility, perceptibility, a body capable of being apprehended by the senses? Definitions, composing of words leave me empty. I know them. I've heard them. I can articulate them, but they don't satisfy when I do. Sin is more than a string of words. It is. It's real. It's not God. It's not man. It's as real as the two and has a life of its own separate from the two parties. Sin separates them, stands between them. Words alone do not have that ability, only sin. If this be correct, is it free? May it move about at will? I'm talking about sin. Is it bound by no law, or is it subject to law? If so, whose? If sin entered the world the moment the first couple ate the forbidden fruit, where was it the moment before? Is it light or darkness, a form of matter to be perceived and analyzed as we said they could be? Sin is as real as those two entities, light and darkness. It exists in the absence of sinners. Sin produces sinners. No sin, no sinners, but is helpless without a host. It is a parasite and needs man to activate it. No other creature can do it, only man. The world before the flood was filled with it, for the world was full of sinners, and they as sinners were the carriers. The flood did not do away with it, for as soon as the water subsided, the doors of the ark opened. Those 8 people put their feet on new soil. Sin reappeared in both the drunkenness of Noah and the shameful act of Ham. They were the carriers and transmitted it to the new world. But again, I'm jumping ahead. Be patient, please. Human beings carry sin, as stated above. It's a parasite, and as such inherently is immobile. It has no ability to move of its own will. It always requires a host, an outside agent distinct from itself. That's man. Here's what Webster says about the word host. Any organism on or in which another, called a parasite, lives for nourishment or protection. It's readily understood then that sin and sinners, mankind, are bed partners. No sin, no sinners. No sinners, no sin. To adequately and correctly understand this matter, one should study carefully what the Bible says about leprosy and the laws surrounding it. Sin, not unlike leukemia, is a blood disease consisting of a group, notice the term group, of neoplastic diseases of the blood forming organs. Once set in motion, results in abnormal increase in production of small, colorless cells in the blood called leukocytes. A leukocyte, singular, requires a forerunner, a harbinger, a precursor. Medical men and people know this as a leukocytoblast. I include the word for its ending, blast. Such is the work of a harbinger. John the Baptist was set before Jesus to prepare or blast the way for him. So sin. It moves, it appears. It comes into people from the outside, but only after a way has been prepared for it. Who prepares the way for it to travel down? The individual to soon become a sinner. Every person invites the culprit into his life. No one else. As powerful as sin is, it's powerless to invade. As deadly as it is, it never intrudes, always waits a formal invitation, as stated above. The forerunner makes preparation for sin's appearance, and who or what is that precursor? The world before Noah awaited only the completion of the 120 years of its respite. We therefore are allotted that length of time to examine the records and attempt to ascertain what happened and was happening when the final curtains were pulled aside in the heavens above and the deep below released their waters, commissioned to utterly destroy, and destroy they did. Back now to the start of the 100 years. The inhabitants of the earth, God, who sees all, misses nothing, placed under surveillance, close surveillance, by a team of angelic beings with unlimited time and resources to adequately access conditions. These beings, I'm talking about these angelic beings, patrol the earth continually, day and night. Read Zechariah chapter 1, verses 7 through 11. The world's destruction was not based on a spur-of-the-moment decision, not lightly. God, as the Bible teaches periodically, calls a meeting of those employed in the working of his vast domain and consults with them. Listen attentively to all reports and then acts. Read Job chapter 1, also 1 Kings 22. With these preliminary thoughts before us, it's now time to look closely at the events which led up to that horrible, catastrophic event. An event so extraordinary in nature, a cataclysm so all-encompassing only the term unique is suitable to describe it. The flood was all of these, truly unique. Nothing before nor after can even remotely approach the magnitude of destruction it wrought. No happening of nature, no upheaval, no sudden and violent change ever swept the face of planet Earth as did those 40 days. The water covered it and then prevailed over it for the next 5 months. 150 days, nothing was immune. This huge, gigantic, immense ball circling the sun, spinning on its axis, as a vehicle out of control swerved, shook, vibrated, and struggled to maintain its orbit. The magnetic lines running from its two poles and the secondary ones flowing out into space found themselves tangled, overlapping around, and through each other. Sparks flew in all directions, so intense the heat. Rocks melted, crystallized, and fused into sheets and mountains of quartz. The fine-grained sands were cemented together so firmly that only breakage occurs through the grains, not the cemented joints. The brilliant hexagonal minerals we study in our laboratories, I refer to crystallines such as silicon dioxide, so abundant all around us. Need we probe the effects of the heavens? Only a few of the waves need we notice. I speak of light and radio waves which emanate from quasars, star-like crystal bodies, celestial bodies stationed extremely distant from the earth. Did the flood reach out that distance and affect them? This planet is surrounded by an atmospheric blanket 22,000 miles thick. All waves travel through it. If the flood affected that blanket, then needless to discuss the waves. Do not weather conditions on this earth affect the radio and television reception today? Terrible the flood, but more terrible what brought it. And more awesome yet a being with the power to do it. I'm at a loss of which of the three to discuss first. Should it be the actual flood, or the God who set it in motion? Or should we look and delve closely into the something, the condition upon the earth that call these forces from above down upon it? Since this essay concerns not itself with the actual flood in its aftermath, and also is not a study of the nature and person of God, only one option is left. The remaining one consists of the prevailing conditions. Sin, therefore, pulls us back to itself in a more definitive analysis, the center of which is chapter 6, verse 5. And Jehovah saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. The subject of this thought is the word wickedness. That's what Jehovah saw. He saw wickedness. The population was wicked. Wicked is an adjective and modifies the noun man. Mankind had grown wicked and produced wickedness, a noun. It therefore, wickedness, was either a person, a place, or a thing. That we know is the definition of a noun. Their wicked acts had ceased to be simple, individual, separate acts, but had grown into a state. The parts had given way to a whole. No longer any joints or seams separating the parts. They had lost all individual identity and jellified and finally crystallized into one body or state. Separate sins had now become sin, a solid state of sin. No pores, not one tiny opening, even microscopic, into which truth and righteousness can enter. For 120 years the preaching of Noah bounced off of them as water off a flint. The first clause of the passage reads, and Jehovah saw the wickedness of man. Moses now expands on it. Not content to leave it at that, he adds, was great. What was? Wickedness was. Whose wickedness? Man's wickedness. Where was it? Everywhere in the earth. But if sin occupied only the earth, God could have removed him off the earth and destroyed only it. But what's the next clause? And that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. Evil did not cover only the earth. It was in the collective thoughts of man. But again, Moses goes deeper and separates the thought and imagination. Is that possible? Do they not mean the same? No, they do not. And a closer look reveals that he in reality does not separate them. Thought produces imagination. The one is the seed, the other the produce. Imagination comes from the Latin imagio, image or imitation, and arises only in thought. Thought gives birth to an image. Imagination furnishes the necessary creative, inventive, clever, and ingenious method or methods to execute the image of the thought. Not only did those pre-flood people have evil thoughts continually, listen to me, They continually imagined ways of executing and practicing them. Their thoughts and imaginations were evil. Not only evil, but continually, ceaseless, unceasing, constant, continuous, endless, unremitting, uninterrupted, unbroken. They were addicted to evil, under the spell and control of it, could not survive or exist without it. The case has been argued, the evidence presented, the final verdict is left for you to decide. We are now ready for the next essay on the flood.